but it works. So thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate everyone joining and everybody being so interested in our housing element and housing. I was just outside talking to a couple of people in the park about the lack of affordable housing. I've been talking to people all day, it seems, about housing, so we'll do a little more. Sorry if this is a little rough. But thank you for being here. I just wanted to recognize, I think we have some officials in the room here. So we have Planning Commissioner Steve Lilly is here. Welcome. We have the mayor here. Mayor Bill Peak is here. Thank you. We have Planning Commissioner Claudia Sawyer here. And Councilmember Joe Emilio is here. We have Councilmember Chapter there in the back. Is there, we have Planning Commissioner Debbie Beck here. Thank you for joining us, Debbie. And am I missing any? Don Murphy. Don Murphy, yes. There's Don Murphy, Vice Chair of the Planning Commission. Thank you for joining. Oh, we have a John Tabb. Thank you for joining us. He's also on our advisory group. Thank you for joining us. School board trustee. And anyone else I'm missing? Okay. And I'm Anastasia Wyatt, housing or what's the housing program manager about a week ago, and then now I'm the community development director. And I also wanted to introduce David Driscoll here from Baird and Driscoll. Some of you may recognize David. He has been with the city for a couple of years. Yeah. You may have only seen him in Zoom calls like I did until yesterday. So he has been working on the Welcome Home housing strategy. So thank you for attending tonight to help us with this meeting. And our Welcome Home housing strategy was kind of a kickoff to get us ready for the housing element. So this was something very unusual that our city took the initiative to create this Welcome Home strategy and is now kind of pivoting into the housing element. So that's the reason I came to the city. I was super excited about the Welcome Home strategy and the work that was being done in housing in a very expensive area, right? We have a big challenge ahead of us. So David, I'm gonna go ahead. Well, first, I think our planning commissioner, Steve Lilly, is going to say a few words. We're working together on some stuff.
Okay, thank you, Stasia. Can you hear me? That seems to be the byword now with Zoom. Can you hear me when people get on the call? So I'm Steve Lilly, and I chair the Planning Commission. And I would like to welcome all of you here this evening to second what Anastasia said to this housing workshop. We are all here tonight because we want to hear what you think, your views, your opinions, your perspectives about the subject of housing. Most of all of us here this evening probably know that the state has a housing crisis, whether it be in terms of numbers or availability, and certainly in the case of the peninsula, affordability. To address this, we'll hear about this more tonight from Mr. Driscoll, but to address this, the state determined some time ago that each community needs to plan for housing. And to do that, they assign numerical numbers to each city, to each region, I should say, for consideration. For Pacific Grove, our goal is 1,125 new housing units between now and 2031, or I should say 2023 through 2031. The numbers kind of are daunting, I guess, in terms of that's an 8-year period. And those were assigned to us by the by AMBAG, or the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments. That number is 14% of our current housing count. Somebody on the Planning Commission once said recently that that is 3 new units a week, every week from July through next year through 2031. So that's quite a goal. But to plan for that goal, and I think that's one reason we're here tonight, we're going to need to consider many issues, including the availability of land for development, density, zoning, water, traffic. We will also need to update our general plan because we need to make sure that housing, land use, transportation, and safety, those elements all match up or coincide in that plan. So we want to hear from you this evening, and we want to hear from as many people in this process as possible. We have a housing survey and a fact sheet that we put together. We encourage you to fill it out if you haven't already, and additional copies will be made available to your friends and neighbors. Then using the information we gather through all this process over the next several months, the Planning Commission, with the help of the staff, will develop housing recommendations for consideration and approval by the City Council later this year, early next year. And if you're not exhausted by then, I don't know when you will be. But with that, Dave, I'll turn it back to you, and good luck this evening, and again, welcome.
Thank you so much, Steve, Lily. Appreciate it. All right. So I just wanted to quickly, there are a few more other really important people here tonight. First are my CSUMB interns who help me with all of our work. So we have Angela Gonsalves here, who's the most extraordinary intern on the planet. And she's been helping me. She's out at the farmer's market every month. She's been helping me with city managers' newsletters and with our whole outreach effort. She's done a fantastic job. So thank you, Angela. Great work. And then Charlie Rosales here is my newest CSUMB intern. And I am very grateful to CSUMB for their program for this internship. It gives us an opportunity to work with young upcoming leaders like Angela and Charlie, and I'm very proud of them. So glad to have them here. I also want to recognize my wonderful PG High help. So we have over there Charles. Say hi, Charles. Chat. And I have Dylan in his nice fancy suit from Italy. He went to Italy to get that suit made and he looks fantastic. And then Alexander over here running tech. Okay, so we've got our local high schoolers joining in. So thank you, all of our CSUMB interns and high schoolers here. And I do see some other people here from MBEP and our housing development world, and I thank you all for coming. And then Ben Nurse is here from Seaside. So thanks for joining. All right.
Awesome. Okay. So
Left out. Now I feel left out.
we're going to do introductions. So you're going to meet all the people around your.
Oh, you're all important. We're all important.
All important. Absolutely. So I'm in the mode of standing up and presenting when I do these things, but I'm actually going to be sitting down because we are recording tonight so that people who could not be here can get the full presentation, and my head needs to be on the screen. So I'm going to sit down and hopefully you can still see me and hear me, or at least hear me. Let's go to the next slide. So tonight is really an opportunity to hear from you. So I'm going to do some talking, and I will try to keep that limited so that you have the opportunity not just to talk to us and tell us your input, but also talk to each other. I'll talk a little bit about just some basic ground rules for that. There's 2 small group sessions we're going to do, each preceded by a short presentation. One is about the housing we need. We're thinking about the types of housing that are missing that we should be prioritizing within the construct of what the housing element is going to require. I'll talk a bit about that. And then, really importantly, where should new housing go? Where could we create additional capacity to meet the needs that we have? Before I go on, I want to see if there's anyone who needs Spanish language or would prefer to participate in Spanish. Charlie's here and can help facilitate that. If there's anybody, raise your hand and he can go through a corner with you and facilitate that. But not seeing anyone, we're going to continue. And then obviously we are at a point in the process towards the beginning. We're not at the very beginning, but we're towards the beginning of the process, and we'll talk about what comes next and what the coming, let's see, we're about 16, 17 months of work ahead to get to an adopted new housing element by December of 2023. That's an important date. Let's see, I'm not going to answer you. That's right. That's it, man. Sure.
Your plan has to be ready by then, or the housing has to be ready by
The housing element, the plan. The plan.
the plan.
Correct. I'm going to just call out a few things, and while I'm doing that, you can think of your responses. Hopefully you know your name, and think a little bit about what you're going to tell the people around the table about what motivated you to come this evening. And what was the first place you lived when you left home, whatever that was, leaving your parents or living on your own with roommates, whatever. Where was that? What kind of place did you live in? There's a few things that you hopefully picked up on the way in. One is a sheet that looks like this that says small group discussion guide and feedback form. And these are questions when we go into the small groups that you're going to respond to. And each of you hopefully has one of these because we want to hear from each of you individually. And then on the back is some basic demographic information. So one of the things we need to do, it's actually required by the state, that we report who participated in this process and making sure that we are learning about that as we go and making special efforts to ensure an inclusive process. So if you could fill out the back of that at any point during the meeting and make sure you give this to us before you leave. There's also a little fact sheet that was at the doors you came in that the Planning Commission put together based on some information we provided, and be sure to take that. And if you have questions at the end of the evening that still don't make sense from that, happy to answer them. And then at the table, there's two things. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but you're welcome to stare at it and see what you see. It's the Rorschach test of sorts, but there's very detailed overview of the work plan between now and December of 2023 of the work that we're going to be doing. It includes at the top the regional housing needs assessment. I'll talk a bit more about that. The community engagement, the pieces and the timing for different workshops and then public hearings, and then all the technical work that's going to be going on to create the housing element. And then the third thing, not the last thing that's on your table is this. I will talk about this for the second round of small group discussions. So, introductions. Those of you who are not around the table, I encourage you to grab a seat around the table. Go around, introduce yourselves to the folks at your table. Name, why'd you come this evening, and where did you live when you first left home?
Kick us off. Would you like to kick us off?
Yeah. I got magic.
We're interested? Yeah.
We're brainstorming.
Okay, hopefully you got around and we got everyone's name. I'm gonna cut us off now. If you didn't finish, then I'm gonna encourage you to do, when you start the next small group discussion, make sure you got everyone's name and know a little bit about their motivation being there.
Oh,
Okay, let's go on to the why we're here. Ground rules. Okay, let's talk a little bit ground rules, but I think you'll all be fine. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I just want to make sure that we all understand today is not just, like I said earlier, giving us your input, but hearing from each other. So be sure that you are both speaking up and stepping back. So making time for others to voice their opinion. We're not all going to agree on things. That's okay. That's why we're having a conversation. So be respectful of other opinions. Listen to try to understand the reason behind an opinion, and seek common ground and accept that we're just going to have differences, and that's okay. We're going to go through this process and come up with a plan that some people will support and others might have issues with, and it'll go forward to city council. And there's a process of public hearings and then a vote of the people's elected representatives to make a final decision. Let's talk now about why we are here. The short version is we're here to talk about the future of Pacific Grove and what makes sense for this community in the construct of a number of state requirements. And I'm here to help you understand what those requirements are and help navigate it and come up with a plan that you believe in, you think is the right plan for Pacific Grove and meets those state requirements. We go to the next slide. So the housing element. Some of you probably are pretty well versed in the housing element, and others of you may not know what the heck I'm talking about. So I'm going to try to tread a middle ground that gives you, those of you who are new to it, some basic understanding. Those of you who are very familiar with it may find this a little elementary, but every community in the state of California is required to have a general plan. The cities, every jurisdiction's ability, right to make local land use decisions is derived from the state. We are a creature of the state. So the state has said, well, if you're going to make land use decisions, then you need to have a long range plan in place that says where the heck you're trying to go, what you want your community to look like in the future. And then all your decisions you make have to be consistent with that general plan. And if you make a decision that's not consistent with your general plan, then a private landowner or someone could come in and say, what the heck? You said you wanted this to happen here and you did something completely different. So you always have to be consistent with your general plan. The housing element is a part of the general plan. And it's a particularly unique part of the general plan because it's the one part that the state actually reviews and certifies to make sure that it is compliant with the state's housing laws. So it goes through a special process that other parts of the general plan don't always go through in terms of state agency review. There are a number of things that are required in the housing element. We're not going to go through all those tonight, but there needs to be analysis of our housing needs that includes looking at the needs of people with disabilities in our community, large families, lower income, in some communities, farm workers is a big part of that. We have to look at our constraints, and there's a number of pieces of that. There's governmental constraints, things that are created by our decisions about standards that we put in place or processes we require, or fees we charge. And then there's non-governmental constraints. In Pacific Grove and in all the peninsula communities, water is a big constraint. And we will have a section of the housing that speaks to what that constraint is and points out the work that is underway to address that. But not having the water or being under a moratorium is not going to be considered by the State Department of Housing and Community Development as a reason to say, well, we can't meet these numbers. We're given a set of numbers. We need to demonstrate that we have the zoning and other rules in place to support the development of those numbers. And we need to point to the things that are being undertaken to address the constraint of water. But we can't say, well, there's no water, so we can't do these, because then we will not have a certified housing element, which means we do not have a general plan, which means we do not have land use approval authority, which means we can't approve or deny development. So there's a lot to delve into that. I'm not going to go in tonight because we're here to hear from you about where and how should we be planning for additional housing. And I'm going to talk mostly about the sites inventory tonight, and we will, as the months go on, talk about the goals and policies programs. There's some new requirements. So those of you who've gone through housing elements processes in the past, this process, so the state does it in 8-year cycles. The last time we did a housing element update was called the 5th cycle. We're now in the 6th cycle. There are a bunch of new laws that we have to respond to. It is a different housing element process this time than it has ever been in the past. And just as an illustration, Southern California, where there's 200 plus jurisdictions under the Southern California area governments, their elements were due December of last year or January of this year. I think about 15 to 20% of them have actually finished the process and got a certified element. So it's taking them a long time. So one of the things that's required this time is a fair housing analysis to affirmatively further fair housing. And if you're involved in housing elements, you're going to hear a lot of acronyms, and people will say AFFH for short, because saying all that is a lot. But it basically means that we need to make sure that we are making decisions that create an environment in which fair housing is available to everybody, regardless of income, regardless of race, that we're not furthering land use patterns that segregate people, that create exclusive areas and areas of where the affordable housing goes. So these, we're going to be doing an assessment of where we're at now. We're going to be considering fair housing as we make decisions about upzoning and sites where we're going to create new housing. And we're going to need to have programs that speak to these. And this is a new area of law, and there's a lot of work going on around the state to figure out how best to do that. And we'll be learning from them. Go to the next slide. So there's also a lot of new requirements, which I'm not going into all detail about tonight, about what's called the sites inventory. So the sites inventory is a big part of the plan. We need to list every property in the city that could realistically accommodate housing development in the next 8 years. That means that not only is the zoning in place, but there's other conditions in place that would actually help facilitate the development of housing consistent with the need allocation that we have to meet our housing needs. So it can't just be a theoretical thing, well, there's an empty property there, and the state says, well, that property's been empty for 80 years. Why do you think it's going to change this time around? So if we were going to say that that property is in our inventory, we would need to have a rationale about why we think the conditions have changed, that would actually now have housing on it, even though it's been zoned for housing for 80 years and nothing ever happened. So there's a bunch of things we're going to have to look at. We have to do an economic analysis on some of the properties, particularly the larger properties the state pays a lot of attention to. If we were going to say, hey, that parking lot downtown, we think it's going to have 60 new units of housing on it, they'll say, show us the math. So we're going to be doing a lot of work on sites. And as we do that, we need to make sure that we are creating a diverse set of housing choices around the community, not just saying, well, we're just going to put we're just going to put a bunch of big apartment buildings over on the edge of town and call it a day. That's not going to work. If we go to the next slide, let's talk a little bit about this. I'm not going to dwell on it, but the consequences of not having a certified element have been going up. And the state just funded, for the first time, what's called a housing accountability unit. So they're not just going to be looking every 8 years to certify your housing element. They're going to be monitoring your implementation of the element, and they're going to be taking legal action against jurisdictions that are not implementing their certified element. Or if you don't get to a certified element, there'll be consequences. So don't shoot the messenger. I'm just here to explain things. But it's just the ante's gone up. So we really need to do our best to get to a certified element.
Question. I want to make sure I understand. Is the state requiring you to build housing?
The state, so the question was, I'm going to repeat this because for people for the recording, they won't be able to hear your question. So the question is, does the state require that we build housing? The answer is no, in that cities don't build housing. But cities create the conditions for housing to be built. So the cities create the zoning, the cities create the development review processes, the cities have programs to support certain kinds of housing outcomes or to make it more challenging to build certain kinds of housing outcomes. And we need to make sure that we have the zoning and standards in place and the programs to support development consistent with our RHNA numbers. So RHNA is another acronym. RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Allocation, and you'll hear the term RHNA from me and others. And people say RHNA 6, that means the Regional Housing Needs Allocation for the 6th cycle, which we are entering. So the 2023 to 2031 is the next 8-year period that we are planning for. We're towards the end, we're not finished with RHNA 5, the 5th cycle, in which you actually achieved your RHNA allocation, which was much lower than it is this time. It was 115, I think that's the number. And it's the RHNA is broken down, you'll see on the bottom of this slide, into 4 income categories. And you hit your RHNA for low income, moderate income, and above moderate income in your previous RHNA cycle. You did not hit it for your very low income. You have a significant deficit of units. Those numbers were much lower. We're looking at numbers much higher. So these are the numbers that we have. There was someone asked about that there might be some discrepancy. I'll go back and look at the plan that was released. There's a draft plan that was released by AMBAG that has numbers in it for every city in the AMBAG region, including all of Monterey County. These are drafts. There was an appeals period that is closed. There will be a ruling on the 2 appeals that were filed. The numbers may change. The AMBAG board can change how the housing units are allocated. They can't change the number. So the county, the region needs to accommodate, make sure that we have the planning in place to support. I can't remember the whole regional number. Anyway, it's a lot more than it was last time. And we need to show in Pacific Grove that we're going to meet these. We're going to continue with our planning based on these numbers plus a buffer, because we need to make sure we have capacity for the full 8-year period in each of these categories. So I'm not going to go into all details of that, but there's just some state requirements that these numbers are here. These are our targets. We're going to shoot a little higher than this as we do our planning to make sure we're in a position that 2, 3, 4 years from now, we don't have to go back out and rezone again because we don't have the sites in place to meet our RHNA. If your eyes aren't crossing yet, you're doing awesome. Let's go to the next slide. So December 2023 sounds like a long time away. It's not, because in that period, we need to send our draft plan, our draft housing element to the State Department of Housing and Community Development, and they look at it, and within 90 days, and right now they're going to the 90 days exactly, they send us a letter and say, here's what we think works, and here's where we think you're deficient. Ideally, we get a letter back that says, it all looks great, go ahead and adopt it. But there's a very, very, very strong chance we will get some feedback from them that they want us to do some things more than what we are putting in the draft. I see a question over here.
I'm sorry, I was just still listening to you on the whole RHNA thing. So my question, I'm just curious, is the high-end projects that are completed now, like say the Holman building and then that other Albatross that's across from the movie theater right now, were these under the RHNA thing of past years? And so that's why they're there. And then when the movie theater gets torn down, that's all been approved in the previous years?
So anything that has, so you can count it at the point that you give a building permit, you basically give the entitlement, or at the certificate of occupancy. If we have a development that say you guys approve tomorrow, and it goes under construction. If it does not pull a certificate of occupancy till after June 30th of 2023, then we can apply that as counting towards our Arena 6. Anything that's completed prior to June 30th of next year counts to Arena 5. And there's a period within there where something you might initially account for Arena 5, but we can count it for Arena 6 because it doesn't get a certificate of occupancy. But just getting your numbers, those aren't going to be a huge number of units, and it's not going to make a huge amount of difference.
But I don't understand how the high-end projects, those penthouses, $1 million condos fall into in your other.
So they got counted as meeting Arena 5. You are above your Arena 5
But not for
target.
any affordable or moderate, or I just forget what.
Right, okay. So
Yeah, so how did any of those because I don't know of any other projects that could fall into moderate income. I mean, these are all, high-end things. So did you not have?
So there's, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember when we're recording, so I just wanted, for people listening, the question is about how do projects get counted, and particularly if we have a high income, above moderate income units, how are those counting towards Arena? The short story is we've more than met the above moderate Arena numbers for the Arena 5 period. We don't have anything yet for the Arena 6 period. You have an allocation of 400 plus units for Arena 6 that we're going to need to make sure there's capacity for. You did meet your low income and moderate income, and we'll talk a little bit about accessory dwelling units as a strategy. And then I don't know. Anastasia walked up here, so I think she might want to say something. Do you want, or?
That's
Okay.
pretty much covered it, yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna move on because the thing you don't want is to listen to me all night.
Question.
Yeah.
Assuming arguendo that the city does everything we can, adopts programs, plans and everything, what is the consequence of the units not having been built since we can't force people to build?
Right. So you can't force, so the question or comment was, what can we, so if we do everything we're supposed to do, we get a certified element and those units just never appear for a whole host of reasons. The economy shifts and no one's building anything. What's the consequence of that? Under current state law, you are put into a category under what's called Senate Bill 35, where a certain set of conditions are required by the state for anything that comes in for affordable housing specifically. So based on percentages, based on what type of housing it is and different percentages of affordability, they could qualify what's called for a streamlined review, which basically says the city must apply only adopted objective standards that you have in place at the time of the application. And you have, it depends on the type of development, mostly about 90 days to determine whether the development proposal meets or does not meet your objective standards. So rather than going through any kind of discretionary process and a lot of public hearings and things, it's just a staff level review. They can come in and qualify for. They can also ask for some modifications to standards. They can get a density bonus through a state program. So right now there's two categories under SB 35. You're actually not in the moderate income category because you met your Arena for Arena 5, but you're in the low income category for SB 35.
Right. Assuming arguendo, nobody comes forward.
Sorry.
Nobody comes forward. There is no developer on the face of the earth that wants to come here. SB 35 says you have to have a development proposal, right? What happens if nobody comes, but we've done everything we can do? That was my question.
Those are the current consequences. The consequences might change in the future.
No, I mean, you went on SB 35, okay, we do all this
Right.
stuff.
That's under the current state law, SB 35.
Right, under current state law, assuming arguendo things continue, nobody shows up. What's the consequence, if any, to the city of Pacific Grove? That
I
was my
can't speak to what the future consequence might
No,
be.
under state law today.
Right. SB 35 is one. There are some specific things where you would need to carry forward your Arena from the current period to the future period.
Nobody comes bearing a development proposal.
Okay. will come to Pacific Grove with developer proposals.
Assuming arguendo, nobody does, what then is the consequence to the city?
We're not enough, we're not enough.
Can I ask the question differently? Can you mention maybe what HCD might do in terms of enforcement?
So if they've certified your, I mean, if it was determined that the city was at fault, then you could potentially not have a certified element. But if they've certified your element and they say you've got all the rules in place and there's no consequence other than what I just described.
Okay, thank you.
But that might change. I just want to make sure, like, understand, like, we're entering a different world
Yeah.
than we've been in the past.
Thank you.
Yes.
So along the same lines, what if nobody comes and then developers, international developers come here, buy up all these little properties, make them low-cost residential, keep them that way for a couple of years, and then everything changes like it always changes. And the rents go sky high. What happens when, in that scenario, after we've just experienced what happened at Fort Ord, where they made $1.5 million low-cost housing for people to come by? And then they couldn't afford it because of the interest rates after a few years, and that went all belly up, but somebody got paid.
So I'm just trying to, I want to figure out how to summarize for the people who are listening to the recording. So the comment is, what can we do if outside developers come in and purchase small properties and then jack up the prices and
Things
things
change.
change. Well, the one thing I can absolutely 1000% guarantee you, everything is always going to change. So
One other half of that question is, in just basic figures, you just made 100 homes that qualified under this, whatever we call it, bureaucracy. And now we're looking at doing 11 times that number. 11 times 100 in this next segment.
so we're not going
We barely accomplished this part.
right. So the question is how we're going to do 11 times what we barely got done in RENA 5. So RENA 6 number is about 800% bigger than our RENA 5 number. So we can only control what we control. And the things that local governments control are land use laws, zoning, development regulations. We don't control who decides to come here and do something or who doesn't come here and do something. We don't control the amount of profit they make. There's a whole slew of things we don't control, but we will be evaluated on the things we do control, which is our zoning and land use regulations, our development review processes, the fees we charge. So that's what we will be focusing on in the House Development Update. I'm going to take one more question and then I'll be during the small groups happy to go around and answer additional questions, but I don't know who had their hand up first. Okay.
He deferred to me.
Okay.
I defer to King. I've been to a lot of government meetings. I'm just a resident. I haven't worked in an official housing, city, county, or other administrative duty. Just as a resident of 40 years, I see this as a tremendously unrealistic program. However, I thank these nice people for at least facilitating the groundwork to satisfy the state. And since this comes from the state, and some of the questions that were just asked by that lovely lady and that gentleman over there, which I found very cogent, I think our best option is to vote out all the people in Sacramento, get a new administration, a new mindset, and I'm sorry if you work for the government and you benefit from this. But this is unrealistic. 1,100 homes, some important questions. Who's gonna build them? Who's gonna finance them? So on and so forth. I mean, come on, I know you guys have a job to do, but I think this is unrealistic. Thank you.
For those listening, the comment was that you should change things in the standard. I just want to make sure people watching know what's going on. Okay, so let's go to the next slide.
Yeah. This is great.
I'm going to hand things off to Angela now, who is going to give a quick, so there's been a survey up on the city site, she'll explain everything. Anyway, Angela's awesome, and I'm going to hand the mic to her.
Thank you, David. Well, I think before my presentation, I think it's time for a quiz. So, the first question, so I'm gonna ask the question, raise your hand, I'll pick on someone, and if you answer correctly, you'll get a prize. So, there's a little bit of an incentive. So the first question is, what does RHNA stand for?
Regional Housing Need Assessment. Thank you.
That was a fast response, so. Okay, question 2. How often is a housing element updated? We got some words in here. Okay, the next question is, what years will this housing element cover? The 8-year period. What 8 years?
Yeah. 2023 to 2031.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. I know, good job. What was the number of housing units Pacific Grove was given this housing element?
For cycle 6.
Yes, cycle 6.
1125.
Okay. I couldn't call on you, John, because you're in my advisory.
The last question is, what does ADU stand for?
Accessory dwelling.
Okay. Good job, everyone. Just making sure you're awake and, Okay, so, as many of you know, I created a housing needs survey, and I'm just gonna give you all a little summary of, the responses we have collected
So far.
so far.
And it's open till September 30th.
Mhm.
So you're welcome to take it. We have flyers in the back. And we worked with our planning commission for some information that you probably got on your way in. So thank you for taking the survey.
The survey is open until September 30th. Okay, so as of today, there was 278 responses to the survey. And one of the questions was connection to the city of Pacific Grove. Out of 277 people that responded to that question, 244 said that they lived here, which is 88% of the respondents. Okay, the next question was, given that there is limited land available, what do you think are the best strategies to manage production of new housing? So, most people chose encourage mixed-use projects that have both commercial and residential uses, and redeveloping existing properties that have potential for more housing. Okay, so the next question was, what do you think are the best ways to address housing affordability? Most people chose financial assistance programs for people who cannot afford housing, such as subsidized rent and down payment loans. And most people also chose incentives for developers to build more affordable housing. So this question was one that people could type and answer. So we just randomly chose some people's answers. So to the question, how does the current housing situation in Pacific Grove affect you or the people you know? Someone responded, we are lucky enough to own our home in Pacific Grove, but the lack of affordable housing has a direct impact on our friends and coworkers. Another person responded, it contributes to the overall affordability crisis and exacerbates inequities in our region. People of all income levels should be able to live and thrive in all areas of the county. We chose 4 responses from each, so 2 more were, it's more and more expensive, will most likely be impossible to live here soon. We're lucky in current situation, but there's nothing for even mid-range income anymore. And then I'm 3rd generation PG. My children and grandchild are 4th and 5th. If I were any newer, we would never have been able to buy or even rent here. So to the question, are there any other thoughts about housing you would like to share? Someone said you should tax unoccupied homes and use the money to subsidize rent for families who cannot afford it, like other cities do. Your fees for the ADU process are high, and this discourages people from creating ADUs. Another person said, build affordable apartment buildings with storefronts downtown. Too many storefronts have been sitting empty for years, providing nothing to the community, just a tax break for the owner. By the way, thanks for this opportunity to provide feedback. And then as a younger resident of PG, I will most likely never own a home here. We should work towards adding more housing and apartments, specifically those for singles and young families into PG. I don't agree that existing homeowners should be able to receive financial accessory dwelling units, as that further divides the haves and the have-nots. And then we're losing seniors that are on fixed incomes who are the core of volunteer programs because they can no longer afford to live here. We need them and they need help too. And then demographics, most people chose that they were 65 or older that responded to the survey. The next age category was 45 to 54. And then race and ethnicity, most people chose Caucasian. Next slide. And then a little bit, some other information is to the question, how does the current housing situation in Pacific Grove affect you or the people you know? Got 247 responses. And then the question, are there any other thoughts about housing you would like to share? Got 166 responses. Thank you.
Any questions on that?
Well, it seems like anybody can pick out the responses they wanted to see. I mean,
It was actually
you took out
random.
4 out of a couple hundred.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
not
it's
really
just
a-
a summary. That's
That's
all.
not really a good, example, to be honest with you. Right?
I'll let you pick
You
next.
choose what you want to choose.
I'll let
Show
you
what
pick.
you want to show. That's the way it's done, yeah. I don't understand fair, and then I'll be quiet for a minute. But you keep talking about fairness. What is fairness? What does that mean? When you build houses and we want to make it fair for everybody, how does that work out? What's the logic behind that?
In terms of fair housing?
Yeah, I mean, what's
So fair housing, there's a legal definition, I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's essentially that, so when we did the Welcome Home Initiative, we looked at your housing stock in Pacific Grove and we looked at your community in terms of who lives and works here. And in particular, there's a huge mismatch between your workforce, you are a service economy, you rely on thousands, literally thousands of low-income workers who work at the restaurants and the grocery stores and the school district and everything else that makes this town go. And your housing stock has become increasingly expensive. It's not always been that way. If you look around town, you have a pretty actually rich mix of types of housing, even in your historic areas. Older, smaller apartment buildings, duplexes, triplexes.
I understand all
So-
this stuff, but what do you mean by fair? What are you talking about fair?
So
You
fair
want
housing,
somebody who doesn't have an income to live here, be able to live here, and then we're gonna have to support.
so fair housing means that we need to make sure that we have a diversity of housing choices to meet all the housing needs in the community. So there's a strong history in the United States of exclusionary zoning that you zone, and there used to be actually racial covenants attached to titles, and many of you look at your title.
The social experiment that you're doing, is
Please let him respond.
So
that what it is? I'm just trying to understand.
the zoning rules are made by people. So yes, it's a social, zoning is a social thing made by people to control who lives in an area. So,
Those days are gone.
well, so the state's requirements are that we demonstrate to them that we have the rules in place to support a diversity of housing outcomes to meet the full range of housing needs we have in our communities.
And I
That's
just, you mentioned the needs we have in our community,
correct.
meaning for the residents of this community, or that's.
Factoring in workforce.
That's trouble. That's a,
So the numbers we have to work from are from the regional housing needs allocation. So those are the ones that we're going to be working from. That defines what the need in our community is.
but it's not.
Within that, we need-
Residents of this community, it could be anybody from.
That's true in every
around the
community.
world. Is that,
That's true, yeah. We need to plan for the future needs of housing in our community, including unmet housing needs.
from, to support anybody that may want to live here from any place around the world? Is that correct?
We need to accommodate the growth that is expected. Correct. So,
Legal, illegal, illegal, I mean, we talking the whole thing, just anybody?
okay, I'm not, let's.
This is the picture, this is what we're talking about.
So every,
Turning around.
so,
Should be covered.
okay, well. I won't go into the history of planning in California, but basically every community in the state of California has restricted housing development. There are very few exceptions to that. And so the state has said, hey, all you local governments, you keep restricting development, and as a result, we have a housing crisis, not just on Monterey Peninsula, we have a housing crisis across the state. So there's a shortage of millions of housing units, and it's because people say, I like my community. Everyone, of course, everyone moves to a community that they want to be in, and they don't want to see change. But if you add that up and multiply it by the entire state, and no one wants to see change anywhere in the state, it doesn't work.
Excuse me.
So I'm not, I don't want to get in an argument with you. I'm just trying to explain the rationale
And
about.
those statements are not true. If I buy into that, then please check the population growth in this state since 1900. Just check the population growth. You told me.
Yeah, it's been huge. Right. So we used
So
to,
we are going through change continuously.
right. If you, it's been in the last 30 years, there's been a precipitous drop off of the number of housing units created in California compared to its historic growth rate. So the numbers that have been used by AMBAG will take you back to the level of growth that you saw in the 1970s. You used to grow a lot. You don't grow anymore. And so I'm not making, I'm just trying to explain to you what I understand the rationale of the state legislation is saying. Across the state, you've cut back, you've said that we don't want to see any more growth, but we're still like an economic powerhouse in the world. I'm not saying Pacific Grove's an economic powerhouse, but California is an economic powerhouse that's created hundreds and hundreds of thousands of jobs and a lot of wealth. And we have not built the housing to respond to that. And the state has said one of the reasons, not the only reason, one of the reasons is local restrictions on development. So they're saying you need to change it. We have the opportunity to figure out where should we put 1,125 units? Where should we plan for it? We're not going to build it. Where should we plan for it? If we don't do that, I'm just here to tell you, I'm not the person who's going to make any decision on any of this. I'm going to facilitate your process, help you write an element that meets the state requirements, or you can decide, you know what, we don't want to meet the state requirements and we're not going to do this. I'm just here to tell you there will be consequences for that. You get to choose whether you want to do it or not. It's not my choice.
What are the consequences? I think it's said in the.
Well, the state, what's played out in other communities is the state brings a lawsuit and the court says you've not met state law and you no longer have authority to plan your land use and make develop decision making. Cities are a creature of the state. It's actually a state.
The rights of the people.
It's why people
Yeah.
leave the state.
I'm going to take one more question and then I want to move on because this is all great, but I want you to talk to each other.
Well, that's my point. I mean, a few people are having a chance to answer questions, but I understand you invited us for our input, so I'm eager to talk to these folks around my table to give you the input you want.
Can we go back to my slide deck? So, thank you. We're going to go back around the table. Those of you who are not at a table, if you want to come, there's some chairs up here. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, we're going to go to the small groups. So this sheet that hopefully each of you picked up on the way in. If you didn't, there should be some at the table that you walked in at. We're going to keep this session pretty short so that we get to the second part, which is about where housing should go. But as a group, and each of you write down your own response. So I'm not looking for a group response, but I'm looking for each of your individual responses, but then sharing around your table how you responded to these three questions. What types of housing are missing? What do we want to make sure to preserve and protect? And other feedback or questions. On the last one, We're gonna collect these. I want to make sure you give this to us. We'll develop a frequently asked questions sheet, an FAQ sheet based on things that you asked in that third question. Okay? So be sure you fill out your individual sheet and then share your responses around the table.
Yeah, I think.
There's one.
Occupied, 3,000. Yeah, something about, I was there in 2021. We're in the last part of it. We typically- Yeah, it's especially, it's typically a higher end, so this is $2.5 million. With one government, it's $10 million. Technical percentage is now would be about $10 million a year. Yeah. This is a more specific. One of them is affordable, and then the rest of the paper.
Okay, what is it that's coming from this area?
Because that's just the way it is. That's good. I mean, you know, one way to take it. You have that, you have to get needed. And if you need the other 9 to make that affordable. So if you do a quick calculation, on it, the other 9, the rent would have to be $14,000 a year. So the rest of the money would be not even very much. So that's why the rules have to be looked at. Make sure that the encompasses are really used here. Not that allows somebody to come in with new rules and say, oh, I bet the rules. That's all. It's fine. So, Mr. Meets our rules. It has to be approved on the grass, but you can't have any discussion.
I've been with
Mine goes out, so. Like, if it's a big number. No, I think it's just, I mean,
Still satisfy the 300. But
I don't.
yeah, I mean, that's what the problem with that. That's why in the first place, that's my own. So it's not really helpful. It's only hard, not really helpful. Remember the numbers now, the biggest numbers are at the low end here. That's what you're saying. The biggest needs. They have the very much the same character.
Right, underline.
See.
So there's still like $20. I'm guessing $500 a year. But you bring them to China, you're talking. They're moving 7 months. Still wants to build a new
That's okay, we're now getting
So I'm going to go on. Sounds like it's a great conversation. I break it up, but do you want to move on and then you'll get back to your small groups? Be sure that you write down your thoughts on those three questions on your individual one. I'm going to launch into the next part of the presentation, which is talking about where could this new housing go. I want to get to it so that we hear your thoughts on some area specific strategies. So, you have zoning in place in civic growth, you can build more housing under the current zoning.
Really quick, sorry, up here, how many housing developers do we have in the room? If you're a for-profit housing developer, could you raise your hand? That's you, Dan. For-profit housing developers? Yes? All right, we've got Dan Silveri here, Catherine Avila from the for-profit development community. How many non-profit housing developers do we have in the room? All right, Jan Lindenthal, Mid-Penn Housing, nice to see you. Thanks for showing up tonight. Any other nonprofit? I don't think I have any others here tonight. But yeah, your perspective is very helpful. Appreciate you all being here. In our advisory group, I talk to the nonprofit, for-profit development community quite often because they have a very different perspective. They come into our planning department and say, I'm thinking about doing X, Y, and Z. How do we get there? And maybe you could do this with your objective design standards or that. And those are things that we depend on them for. So thanks for being here tonight.
Great, thank you. So we're going to talk about where could we create new housing opportunities? What kinds of strategies could we consider in this element update? I'm not going to be drilling down to specific sites tonight, but talking about areas and sort of like what could we do that would be different than what we've got today. Sorry, let's go to the next one. So let's go to site strategies. Sorry, the one before that. So I'm going to talk about 4 specific strategies. This is not an exhaustive list. These are things that we actually identified and talked about when we did the Welcome Home Initiative work. But when we're doing that, we thought probably our RENA number for Pacific Growth would be about 400. So it's much higher now. I would just underscore that it's not about choosing one of these. All of these are going to probably be part of the overall site strategy we implement. And we're looking for your feedback on what do you like, what doesn't really work, what could we do maybe differently in each of these areas, and are there other things not on this list that you think we should put in the hopper for consideration? And this is the preliminary piece tonight. We're going to be setting up sort of an online tool that people can go on and identify different parts of the community where they think additional housing could be added and use it as a way to talk about trade-offs between different approaches. I'm going to talk about these 4. So ADUs, and we had a winner for the swag contest. ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. It's accessory to the main use on the property, the main use typically being a single family home. But you can actually build an ADU on a multifamily property as well. Under state law, the state changed the rules about ADUs. Anybody in the state of California can add an ADU to their residential property. They can actually do 2. They could do what's called a junior ADU, which is internal, so like a converted basement or garage. And they could do an external, a detached ADU. And if it's 850 square feet or less, and there's certain rules about what you can do, certainly there's some limits in terms of its certain like environmentally constrained areas and things, but most people have the right to build an ADU. In Pacific Grove, you've been seeing in the range of 20 to 40 ADUs per year. Under the state law for housing elements, we take your average over the last 3 years, we multiply it by 8, and we say this is how many ADUs we expect to see in Pacific Grove. You have about 5,600 residential properties in Pacific Grove. So one strategy, you add one to every one of those, you fit it out the park on getting to your 1,125 units. But that's not going to happen because not everyone's going to choose to build an ADU. You see a small fraction of that overall possibility come forward on any given year saying, I want to build an ADU in my property. And then people use their ADUs differently. We have data, so we will be able to count in that projected number that about 1/3 of them are serving very low income, about 1/3 of them are serving low income, and about 1/3 of them are serving moderate income. There's some reasons for that. So people build an ADU and sometimes they're actually, we used to call them mother-in-law units. They're actually building them for their mother-in-law and they don't charge a rent. So it's actually a free rent unit that's used by a family member or a friend, or they might have someone they know well and they want to stay there and be a long-term tenant, and they're going to rent for less than they might otherwise on the market if they're set at the market rate. So ADUs tend to rent for less. They're also smaller. They're not a solution to all of our housing needs because they all are small units. You don't see it's typically a family of 4 living in an ADU. But it's great for singles or for couples, small families. So there's things we could do in the housing development process to make ADUs more attractive and easier to build than they are today.
How do you get a water permit for an ADU?
So you have I won't speak to the details of how that works in Pacific Grove, but you have a water meter on the site. So you check that box that there's an existing meter and then there's an allocation process and other people know better than I do.
We don't have it, we have 2 bathrooms, but I understand that's all we're allowed to have.
I would rely on someone at the city to answer the question how they would look at an application. ADU application related to water.
Okay.
What is the question?
How do you deal with water on an ADU application? You've got a meter on the side.
Yeah, that's a water meter. Right, an ADU is an accessory to the main dwelling unit, so if you already have water on your unit, so you can work with the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District to, if you have fixtures like a toilet that's using an old toilet, and now you can do convert that toilet to something using less water. Sorry.
You purchase water through the city of Pacific Grove.
Right, there's 2 ways, right? One is that you can work on your fixtures and get more water efficient fixtures. That's one way. And you can get more credits. Two is that you can purchase water. So those are two things that you can do to have enough water for your ADU.
More to this than what you're suggesting, because you have to put in an ADU on property. You have to stay within the buildable area, the buildable floor area, the site coverage and all the other.
Under state law, you have to have a minimum 4-foot setback. So the state law for ADUs overrides local restrictions. So I'm not gonna go, I want to get back, so I want to get to the roundtable conversations, and this is great, and I welcome to put it on your form if there's questions you want us to look into and respond to.
Yes, and we did have an ADU workshop in September of last year, and it was really well attended and great. So thank you. Yes, it's not that simple. There's a lot more to ADUs, and that's a whole nother workshop. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to jump to strategy 2.
I have a question. You said there are 5,600 residential units in Pacific.
5,600 properties, residential properties.
Are those defined as single-family homes, or are there a?
It's a mix. So you can add an ADU on any residential property. Right. Okay, let's go downtown. So obviously downtown's a good place to think about mixed use development, potential increases in density. You have a particularly unique downtown with a lot of historic properties, so there's not a huge amount of potential downtown, but there are some key opportunity sites that we could look at the zoning, increase the zoning, make it easier to build housing. You've had some development downtown. It's been upper income. Are there ways we could put in place requirements for what's called inclusionary, affordable units on the site? We could give additional incentives to actually build more affordable housing. So you get this much if you're not doing affordable, you get this much if you're doing affordable on the site. There's different strategies. We're just putting out there tonight that this is an area that is on the list of places to look where we could create additional housing capacity above what you have today. In that same lab, I've got 3 things, and you'll see as we go into small groups, we've got them organized on these sheets, but there's 3 areas that are kind of commercial, mixed use in nature, where we could look at increasing capacity. The other is what's Central Erdley. This is like east end of Lighthouse towards Monterey Bay Aquarium, that area. It's not a huge area. It's about 10 acres. A number of them are not going to redevelop because of what's on the ground today, but we could look at areas, properties within that area that could potentially redevelop within the time period if we have the right zoning in place. So that's a second area. And then the third area, you have what's called R4, residential 4. That's your highest density residential district today. We could look at those areas and look at what the zoning is in place, and are there things we could change in terms of development standards and such to encourage additional housing in those areas. On your map packets you have on your table, there are maps that show the boundaries of those areas. So strategies that we could pursue in the housing element, and then subsequently in your general plan update and rezoning of your land use element. Increase the base density. That would be looking at what's called FAR, floor area ratio. That's the size of the building you can put on a particular lot. Look at increasing the height. There's something called a form-based codes. Rather than regulating based on units per acre, we regulate based on the building envelope. If you want to put a bunch of smaller units on that, go for it. If you want to do fewer big units, okay. That's an approach that a lot of communities are doing, particularly in terms of we need to put in place what are called objective design and development standards. So a form-based code helps to solve part of that, not problem, but that the sort of need now to have objective standards, because you've defined, here's the building envelope and here's what we expect you to how to design your building. If you design your building like this, then you get approved. It's not a back and forth. So I'm not going to go into objective standards tonight, but right now in your code, you have things like must be consistent with neighborhood character. So 5 people read that, 5 people come to very different conclusions about what that means. Objective standards means that 5 people read your standards and they know exactly what you mean. and they can design a building to it, and not go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for a year trying to figure out what it is you're looking for in that building that they're trying to design. So let's see, that, yeah, there's a potential for inclusionary requirements, and like I mentioned earlier, incentives for doing affordable housing. It's part of the mix. Forest Hill area, that's a third potential strategy area. Yeah.
Incentives, what does that mean?
That you get additional building square footage if you meet certain affordability limits. So we could have a program in place that says anything you build that's residential in this area needs to be 20% of the units need affordable. But if you give us 50% of the units affordable, we'll give you additional height, additional FAR, sort of as an incentive to do that. It requires more subsidy to create those units, so we give them more ability to create something that's going to pencil. And all of these, when we present this to HCD, we need to show that we've done the homework, that it's actually feasible. So we could say, well, we want it to be a 30-foot building, it needs to be 50% affordable, and it needs to be clad in gold. And they'll say, well, that's not feasible. I'll say, well, we did it all. Yeah, so we're gonna have to do some feasibility analysis to come up with something that we can demonstrate is actually something that we developed. Forest Hill area is up at David and Forest, and there's some older commercial shopping centers there. If you look at your specific plan, it was done in the 90s, so late 80s, 90s. It calls for sort of a bunch of things that were done to make that a better shopping area. It does not really speak to housing at all. You can build housing there, but it's not encouraged under your zoning. We could change the zoning there to encourage mixed use development. Obviously not every property there is going to be something that people would look at redeveloping, but we could talk to the property owners there, look at opportunities to increase the zoning to encourage some redevelopment. It's pretty suburban in character right now. There's a number of what could be called underutilized properties. Similar kind of set of tools that could be applied there, similar to the downtown, but obviously it's a different character of a place and probably require a little more planning to make sure that what gets redeveloped there works as a whole. And then the last one I just want to highlight tonight, and then you get into the small groups so you can talk about your ideas and your feedback on these ideas. There's this term called middle housing or missing middle housing. So the way development has been playing out in the last 20 years or so, and our zoning rules, it drives single family homes and apartment buildings. And you're a great example of a town that if you go around town, you'll see a lot of what people call missing middle. You see scattered in amongst single family homes, older duplexes and triplexes and small little apartment developments that have 6 units. So there's been a movement around the country to look at our zoning standards and reintroduce missing middle or middle housing into the mix, more reflective of what we used to build. That requires changes to how your zoning is set up. So your R2 and your R3 zones, and I'm sorry, I apologize for people who don't know zoning. It's like R3 and R4 are zones that you have in Pacific Grove that are actually called duplex zoning, and sort of R4 is basically the same thing, but has a commercial component. We did some analysis when we were doing the Welcome Home Initiative, saying, okay, like there was actually a lot of interest. Like, where could we create more kind of duplex, smaller units, a mix in these older neighborhoods, walkable to downtown. The current market wants to build really expensive single-family homes. So the analysis we did, like the duplex, triplex loses almost every time in a pro forma analysis to big single family home. So, but there are some things we could do to change the zoning to make the townhomes and the duplexes and smaller units more attractive, make them more economically competitive. That's one. The other is that we say we're not going to allow demolition of those units, and we're not going to allow new single family homes in these areas. So it doesn't mean that everything there gets to stay, but you don't get applications of what you're getting to tear down a duplex that's been there for a long time and replace it with a single family home. So there are things we could do, strategies we could adopt, tools to put in place, regulations that would encourage more middle housing in these close-in neighborhoods. So those are 4 examples of strategies. And like I said earlier, in my mind, they are all in play, they're all on the table as we try to figure out how to get to 1,125 units. We want to hear your feedback on those 4 strategies and other thoughts or ideas you have, and capture them. So if you want to give us feedback on what you see as like the good parts and the bad parts, the ugly parts of those ideas, there's sheets in here for you to write down the pros and cons. And then really importantly, your individual feedback, and have some discussion around your table about that one sounds really great. I think we should pursue that. That one, maybe if we made some changes or we approach it this way. Or you might say, I don't like any of those. That's okay too. The point is to hear from each of you your thoughts as we prepare for a much more focused analysis on specific site opportunities. Yeah.
I'm just curious, like when you said that the city doesn't have any control of developers coming in, but can the city, or has it ever put out RFPs, asking developers, young architects, the emerging professional for put plans and projects on, say, lower income or not necessarily, but affordable complexes, not necessarily like this latest one that's.
So the question is, does the city ever put out RFPs to attract developers to build a certain type of housing that we're looking for? The one thing that's not on this list tonight is what I would call key opportunity sites. So there are some city-owned sites, potentially some school district-owned sites, potentially some church-owned sites where we could enter a partnership. We actually did a session in the fall of creative partnerships for affordable housing, where we actually had several people who do affordable housing development in the city talk about what could that look like? What are other communities doing? So the city says, we've got this property, I'm just making this up, and we want to see a spanking new community center and 40 units of affordable housing. And we're going to put in the land as the city. We're going to give it a long-term lease to you, nonprofit or for-profit developer, if you build us this. And maybe we're going to put in some money to help make that happen, but we're looking for your proposals. So in your community, the Vista Point senior housing down by Lovers.
Which list was closed 7 years ago?
I'm sorry?
Which waiting list was closed?
Right, so which has been very popular. But that is the one affordable deed restricted housing development you have in Pacific Grove. It serves seniors, low income seniors. It's who currently owns it? Eden Housing currently owns it and manages it. And that's an example of what could be done on a key opportunity site. Could be a community on site. Potentially, it could be something that a private property owner wants to do, doing what's called the low income housing tax credit deal, LIHTC, which is how most affordable housing in the US is built these days. So we're going to go around tables. I'm happy to come around and answer questions as we go around, but I want the conversation, because we're at 7:35, and I want you guys to have a chance to talk about your ideas at the tables, capture them on your different sheets. Yeah.
It's just fun. That's so it's fine.
I want to talk to you.
I'm pissed off about that because the next one
Well, and your other thing is. They came from that big culture around.
Very expensive, because they happen between, you know, they get happen. Has to be parking lots, and you have to be one of these small families. But it's gonna happen. Nice place. In terms of
I can find it. Arts gallery. I mean, there's things that we're gonna have to build our rental housing. That makes that all, yeah. That lots of lines there already. Right now, it's right now, that's our
oh, well, Getting back in the opposition.
It's not.
That's what I'm talking about. We're going to work towards wrapping things up. Another time, let's see my voice, but, I have a couple of things we want to cover before we go. I want to thank everybody who came up here to jump on, but let's just get a few quick thoughts from a few of the people that's on your conversation that came up that maybe you got excited about as an idea. Okay. Anastasia, well, get the phone. We have the magic mic that we can go around just to get a few. You can afford it on. For those of you, if you are leaving, please be sure to leave your comment form on the table on the way out so we can gather your over here in the second back here. We're going to just have a couple few quick popcorn around things that came up in the conversation. We're excited about.
Okay, I'm just referring to some of my table mates, but we had two very interesting ideas. One is in zoning R2 and above is prohibit people from downzoning or upzoning. In other words, if I have a property that's zoned for multiple units, I can't raise them and build a single family unit. That was one. The other one, I defer to my colleague here, was to allow condominiumizing some of our parcels. Say I had the main house and an ADU, could I then make the ADU a condo transaction and allow it to be sold without subdividing the property? Thank you.
All right, okay. Another table, quick,
So then it came up, in both group conversations at this table was, really the need to keep all options on the table. That this, shouldn't really be a multiple choice question so much as a ranked choice question. We can't really solve our housing needs and our housing problems if we're keeping things off the table. And so we really would like to see, all strategies moving forward to some degree or another.
let's do one more. You want?
Anyone? Okay.
It seems like people are observing that this place was designed to be built this way and that the designs can be changed. So we can get creative with designing a community here, and what a community looks like.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna say one more. Oh, I think, yeah,
One more?
anyone else?
I just wanted to reiterate that, I forgot your name, but Barbara, you know, he was saying, losing people that, because she's at the aquariums, you know, when the workers can't afford to live here, we're in trouble. And, you know, I feel like from this group here, maybe I'm wrong, I just felt like it was like the gate closed mentality, so we're talking affordable housing. I didn't mean, you know, recruit some from Iowa, I think when the existing residents are being forced. You know, Monterey has the workforce housing.
Oh, sorry, I'm gonna switch things.
Anyway, I know I'm jumping all over the place, but I just think that this housing department needs to do more and not just all the high things. That's why I specifically asked you about developers coming in here, because this next developed thing that they were planning, that's the 4 and 5 bedrooms. It seems insane to me. That's not serving this community's needs, you know? So and then you add in the short-term rentals, that took housing away too, and there's no way to get that back. So all those accumulated issues have left us kind of in a mess.
Thank you. So let's.
One more at this table?
I'm sorry.
I want to.
Yeah, I've been working since I'm 80 years old, Miss. And, 75, I worked all my life. I come from a working family, I come from a working community. And I realize that we can't bring people into an area like this that they can't afford to buy a house and then expect them to survive. I mean, somebody's gonna have to pay for the schooling and their health and all this stuff, and it's gonna be put on the backs of the people that live here. So I'm just saying, we just have to look at this a little bit more realistically and understand what we're doing. I'm for the little guy. I'm a little guy myself, okay? So let's just take a good look at all these proposals and do the right thing, but we can't do it from just floating in the air.
Okay, I'm gonna wrap us up. Thanks. I think tonight we've underscored that there's a diversity of opinions, and that's okay. And I just so things got a little heated. I apologize if I played into that, but it doesn't bother me. I'm here to facilitate what's going to be a contentious conversation. It's a hard conversation. And at the end of the day, we're going to have a housing element. Hopefully, it's my job, my commitment to you to try to get it certified. But I can only get it certified if we include certain things. And that'll be a decision of your planning commission and your city council. And at the end of the day, they'll decide, the people's elected representatives will decide what the housing element is. And I will be here to tell you whether I think it's going to make it or it's not. And so it's a process getting there. We are committed to having an inclusive process that we hear all the different opinions. And that those are reflected back, and you will see a summary of what we heard tonight, what people wrote on their forms. And we'll be sharing those out after tonight. If we go to the next, let's go to the next slide. What happens next, and then the last slide there. So we'll be compiling, sharing out things. We will be, so to the point of everything's on the table, that is true. We're going to be carrying these scenarios and anything else that might bubble up in the process that seems like it's promising forward into a next round of engagement. That will include an online engagement opportunity and then some focused outreach, and then probably another community workshop in the fall. Our aim is to have a public draft of the element out in the first quarter of 2023. There will be, under state requirements, a 30-day public review period where you can review that draft element and write your comments to us. We are required to take 10 business days exactly to review your comments and respond back and say, thank you, we heard it, or we've made a change, we did, something we corrected. That public draft, following your input, goes to state HCD as a draft. And then they look at it and they say, we think you're great on this things. We think this doesn't come close enough to what's required. They send us their comments. We have the opportunity to respond to their comments. In an ideal world, we get one round of comments and we then make any final tweaks. It goes forward to the Planning Commission and the City Council to adopt. We have built into our timeline the expectation that it's going to have to go back to HCD one more time so we can show them the changes we made and make sure they think that's up to snuff, and then we'll go to adoption by December 2023. There is a slight little bit of grace period after December 2023, but we are not going to count on that in our timeline. So things are, it all sounds maybe a little far away, but things are moving pretty quickly. We will do our best to keep you informed. Please make sure that you've signed up on the email list on the website, the Housing Element Update website. We'll be using that as well as the other traditional media channels that the city uses to get the word out. Encourage your neighbors, others to get involved. There'll be that online engagement. I understand coming to an evening workshop is a challenge, but we'll be doing some online engagement so others can participate. Tonight's workshop is recorded. We will edit out all the parts where you're talking to yourselves. So it won't be 2 hours if someone wants to watch it and catch up and see what happened. And that is it. We're obviously going to be working on a lot of the behind the scenes tech stuff too, but yeah.
Will you have the comments online so that we can see all of them?
Yeah, well, I'll figure out. We may scan so that people can see the individual rather than having someone type out them all, but we'll figure it out. You'll be able to see people's comments. Yeah. Yeah, one last thing.
Is it possible for you to provide, or the team, your team, to provide a vision of a city that already, in California, that already exists, that it gives us an idea of, in your mind, where we're headed? And I think because that would really be very helpful.
Well, obviously in the state of California, there's a lot of different, we are definitely, so one of the advantages we have in the AMBAG region is that several other regions of the state have gone through this process before us. So I think I mentioned Southern California area governments, the Association of Area Governments, all the communities in the 9-county Bay Area need to have their housing elements in by January of 2023. So they're actually right now in the HCD initial review process. So we're looking at the issues that are being identified by HCD where housing elements are falling short. From Southern California and Sacramento area, they're falling short on their AFFH, affirmatively for housing analysis. They're falling short on their sites inventories, and they're falling short on community engagement.
But
So-
my question is,
But,
could you possibly say, you know, here are three cities that have done a good job, and this is likely the direction we're heading.
in terms of their housing plan or in terms of housing development?
Yeah.
Housing plan? Yeah, I mean, there's,
Housing plan and what they.
yeah, we're looking at the ones that have been certified and sort of seeing what they've done to get to certification.
I mean, is that possible that you could give that, you know, on the
Yeah,
website?
I mean, we can link to, the state actually has a site where they post up all the certified housing elements.
No, I'm saying in the view of the team, your teams, you give us your vision of where we're headed.
I'm not sure I fully understand. So we can show you examples of certified elements. In terms of where you're headed as a community, that's what this conversation is about, because Pacific Grove is Pacific Grove. So finding the right path for Pacific Grove is up to you all to figure out. I mean, I can point to there's communities that have achieved certified elements. That doesn't mean that you're going to be like those communities.
Maybe I misunderstood. I thought we were going to see, I mean, we're going to continue to have some workshop.
Right.
And then we're going to see around, you have a 30-day review period.
Right.
Okay, and then it's going to be submitted. So I'm saying, why not now give us a vision of where you believe you and your team where we're headed? And point to city A, or three cities. There's A, B, C. And then we can start thinking about it.
Okay. Well, let's continue that conversation because I'm not fully understanding, but we can definitely give links to certified housing elements. And when we put out the public review draft, I'm happy to give you a link to what the checklist that HCB will be using when they review the housing elements. So if there's tools like that that are helpful to you.
Just a final point. My point is just.
Yeah, it's time to wrap up.
Hold on.
No, sorry.
If it is the city of Dublin, California, great, just let us know.
Okay, you know, Pacific Grove is its own community. I'll just say we have to figure this out together, and we're always looking at different examples, but really keeping to the core of what we're doing here as a community. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thank you, David. You did a great job explaining the extremely big task that we have ahead of us. So we appreciate your participation. Please fill out your forms, and any other quick little questions, we're here. Thank you, everyone. David, do you want to wrap up and say any final? Okay, thank you.